So this webinar is on preparing for the Phonics Screening Check. This webinar is designed for teachers, so it will be all about what's going on in the Phonics Screening Check from the teacher's perspective. Next week, we're actually doing one that's specifically for parents as well, so you can always invite parents from your school to come and watch that one. So what is the Phonics Screening Check? Well, it is a little test sort of thing, but just a check rather than an official test, which measures the children's reading ability using 40 words. Now, 20 of these words are real words. They're words that you could find in a dictionary, and 20 are pseudo words. Now, pseudo words mean that they don't have meaning in English, but it does still have a plausible spelling in English. So it wouldn't be with completely made up spellings, as in you wouldn't find Z, B and L all next to each other. They will still be fairly plausible as an English looking word, but they don't actually have meaning in English. There is no time limit on reading these words, and the pass mark for the check is variable each year, but every year so far it has been 32. The information's never released until after the check's actually been completed. So here are some examples. On the left, you've got some of the real word examples there, and on the right, you've got some of the pseudo word or the nonsense words or alien word examples there. And the check itself is progressively more complex as you go through. It's all focusing on decoding, so it's not about any of the comprehension at all. Sounding out words is acceptable, and so is self-correcting. And children can have a break during the test as well. So as you go through, towards the end of the check, you will see some more complex spellings in there, some longer words, and some rarer GPCs in there too. So when is it? Well, this year it is in the week beginning of the 9th of June. That's the Phonics Screening Check week. There's what's called Variation Week is the week after, the week beginning 16th of June. That's for if any children were off in the Phonics Screening Check week, you can get them to sit it in that week afterwards as well. So it shouldn't just be used as an overspill week. It is just if the children are off for that week. And then the pass mark is actually due to be announced on Monday, the 23rd of June there. So this is for year 1 children, but it's also for any year 2 children that would need to resit. By year 1 and year 2, this is the normal age of if children are in their regular year groups. So it is when the children are 6 or 7 for the resit, if they've turned that age that year so far. Okay, so why do we do the phonics screening check? Well, the purpose of it is to confirm that children have learned the phonic decoding to an age-appropriate standard. Children who have not reached that level should get extra support from their school to ensure that they can improve their decoding skills. So really, it's for us as teachers to be able to identify those children that need that extra support and have that chance to take the phonics screening check again in year 2. But early reading is vital. If children can't access texts, they're not going to be able to access so much more of the curriculum. So we really do need to get this right. And why does it use nonsense words? Well, it's because it's the purest form of decoding assessment. So it's not like that we don't ever come across nonsense words, but sometimes we need to use those phonics skills, and nonsense words are the only ways that you can tell that it really is decoding and not just words that have been memorized. But we always come across words that might be complete nonsense words to us in the beginning. Authors make up names, or you might have places you've never heard of, or just even vocabulary that's brand new to you. So all of these things we would need to use our decoding ability for. Now, if you're administering the check yourself, the adult that is delivering the check should be familiar with phonics and well trained in the subject. It should be a teacher, or if it is a teaching assistant or a HLTA, then they must be experienced in delivering phonics to the pupils. There's quite a lot of complex phonics knowledge that would be needed, that's all talked about in the administration guidance, which is always really good to check as well if you are delivering it. But teaching assistants and HLTAs may have that if they do it a lot, but they might not always. And even if you are a teacher, you still need to make sure you've got that phonics level of knowledge needed for it. The person administering the check must be known to the pupil, but not related. So you don't want a strange teacher that the child's never met before, but also it can't be a relative of the child. And we should be administering the check in a room that is quiet and a comfortable, well-lit space. The room should be prepared before pupils are admitted. So if there's any display materials which could help the pupils, you must remove them or cover them up so that they can't be used to help the child during the check. And if more than one adult is administering the check to pupils at the same time, you may need more than one room. So rather than having two children doing the check at the same time in the same room, having different rooms so that they can't interrupt each other. Okay, so on to access arrangement. There's actually quite a lot that you can do to make the check more accessible for your children, and being aware of all these things and using it is really, really helpful to getting the best success out of the children. The first one is rest breaks. So there's no time limit on the check. It's estimated to take a child approximately 4 to 9 minutes, but you can take as long as you need. If you need to do that, you might want to use fewer words on a page if you think the pupil needs more frequent rest breaks than per page. So you could just have 2 words on each page instead. If children are having rest breaks, they must be kept separate from the rest of the cohort during the break until the check is complete. Now, this should only be used, like the rest of the access arrangements, if it is normal classroom practice for that child. I have had a child that I've sat with before and it's taken 45 minutes to complete the check, and then they had frequent breaks in between as well. So don't be scared to take as long as you need in order for that child to be successful. Cued speech can also be used if a pupil with a hearing impairment is familiar with it, and it can be used by an appropriately trained professional to make the child's responses clear. So if a pupil with a hearing impairment would prefer to speak the word, you should use cued speech to help clarify what sounds they are aiming for. But there are certain instances where pupils won't be recommended to take the check. So that's if pupils have no understanding of the GPCs, the grapheme phoning correspondences. They haven't completed that first year of the Key Stage 1 English programme of study. They have recently moved to the country, so they can't understand the letters and sounds in English. And if they use British Sign Language or other sign-supported communication, such as communication boards, to spell out individual letters. So they can use cued speech where they are speaking and using that cued speech to identify exactly what they're speaking, but not if they are just using sign language or sign-supported communication. If they are non-verbal or selectively mute, they should not take the check, or if they have been absent during the check window, which is that Phonics Screening Check week and that variation week after it. If you have children with speech difficulties, you can take that into account. So if you've got a child that you know says rather than the phoneme with their tongue, then you can take that into account in their responses. Also, visual phonics, which is where children use an action to support the sound they are saying, can be used. By this, I don't mean you can give the action to the children, because that would be telling them the answers of the check as such. But if a child says a word and you're not quite sure which sound they were going for, then they can do the action linked to your phonics scheme to help you know which sound they were aiming for. And you still not to tell them whether it was correct or not, but they can use that as a bit of an aid. So that's great if you're using Phonics Shed, you've got all of your Phonics Shed actions that could help support with that. But again, only if this is normal classroom practice for these children. And sound buttons. Pupils can actually put sound buttons on the words themselves in the check. So they can draw their own sound buttons onto the words and then read the words if that helps support them. If this is something they normally do in class, you must give the pupils a clean copy of the check so they can mark the sound buttons against the graphemes. You must not mark the graphemes for the pupil. So they recommend in the guidance printing out a clean copy of the check for each child that's going to be drawing sound buttons on it. I know I've heard of some people using a clean overlay or laminating it so the child can do the sound buttons with a whiteboard pen. It doesn't explicitly say either way in the guidance whether that is okay or not okay. When I've done it before, I've done it on paper, even though it's more printing. But you can always ring the helpline number to check if you want to check about that laminated section. And adapting the check materials. So Braille versions must be ordered in advance. If you need any Braille versions, make sure you order it before Tuesday, the 22nd of April. This is normally your head in your school that needs to order it, but make sure your head's aware and that they know that they need to be ordered if that is the case. But during the week, you can actually download different versions of the check. There's one with black and white images, or without images altogether if you have children that find that too distracting. You can also change the font size, have fewer words per page, or have coloured overlays. They are all acceptable adaptations to the check. Some people like to change the font because it's got the curly K and the F with the flick around the bottom as well. And some people don't use that in their phonics scheme, so they change it to the standard K that children would expect or the standard F. So it's all in a similar font to what children are used to. Okay, I'm going to talk a bit more deeply about the structure of the check itself next. And then after that, we're going to talk about the planning and all the resources that you've got that could really help support that. So the structure of the check is all outlined in the assessment framework for the development of the Year 1 Phonics Screening Check, which is available on this link, or if you Google it, you'll find this as well. So it is very clearly defined. The real words usually have about between 40 and 60% less common words. So most of the real words that come up in that check will still be quite obscure for children. Less common words are included so that the majority of children will need to decode using phonics rather than rely on the sight memory of the words they've seen before. Within each section, it's all ordered according to the difficulty, and the real words and the pseudo words are grouped together. So you'll never get real and pseudo words mixed up on the same page. The words at the end of the phonics screening check are around the level of difficulty they expect for children at the end of Year 1. And over time, the phonics screening check will include all the single letters of the alphabet and all the GPCs listed in the document, but that doesn't mean they all happen in one check. This is over a few years. And the inclusion of the graphemes doesn't necessarily represent how common it is. So you might find they actually put X, the letter X, in as much as the letter T, even though in real language, the letter T would be far more common. So we've got a document available, which you can use this QR code or that link at the top to download. It is available in our help section on the website, and it shows you where the Phonics Shed scheme teaches the things that are in this STA guidance. So you can use that link to download it if you want to. And it shows you all the graphemes and the phonemes that it represents, including an example word, and then it tells you which chapter and set of Phonics Shed that would be taught in. So for section 1, all of the GPCs that are included in section 1 will be taught in chapter 2 or chapter 3 of Phonics Shed. So they're all taught in reception. So by the time you've done reception, you should be able to access 20 of these 40 words in the check. There's also certain structures outlined in that document of what the words can be. So it gets a little bit complicated with lots of CVCs all over the place, but just to explain it briefly, you can have a look at the phonological structure of words or the orthographic structure. And the phonological one, the C is used to mark each consonant or consonant digraph. So for each consonant phoneme, there will be a C. And for each vowel phoneme, that's marked with a V, including Y when it represents a vowel phoneme. So if you had the word buy with BY as the spelling, that would be a CV phonological structure because it's got one consonant phoneme and one vowel phoneme, even though the Y is a consonant. The orthographic structure is used to mark, the C is used to mark each consonant letter. So if there's a digraph or a trigraph, it'd use 2 C's or 3 C's next to each other underlined. Well, it would only be 2 in a consonant digraph. So you've got 2 C's together and usually underlined to show you that they're connected, and that's showing you the orthographic structure instead. So phonological is all about the phonemes. Orthographic is about the actual letters that are written down. With the V's, you've got a single V to mark each vowel letter, or the digraphs and trigraphs would be underlined like that and bunched together. And if it's a split digraph, you have this VCV all bunched together, and often the V's are underlined in that to mark that split digraph. If you ever go on any of the word lists on the Spelling Shed side of the website, you will see the phonological and orthographic structures of the words when it's in its expanded form. So the blue one at the top is the phonological, and the red one at the bottom is the orthographical. So all of the words in the check are following this sort of criteria. There's lots of CVC words, which might be 3-letter words, but they might sometimes have more because it's talking about the phonological structure. You get a VCC word like act, CVCC and CVCC, which is where the extra consonants added on the beginning or the end of the words there are some examples on the screen. So I'll just take you through what last year's check was. So it starts with lots of CVC and one VCC on the first page. It always starts with the pseudo words on here as well. Sorry, skip 2 there. Page 2, they start to bring in some of those consonant digraphs or vowel digraphs. On page 3, again, you've got some of them consonant blends together now. So it starts at the top with the consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant, whereas at the bottom, it's the consonants on the end instead. I find that interesting because usually children find it a bit easier to add the consonant on the end than they do beginning, but they always do it this way around in the phonics screening check. Then you go on to real words with that same sort of structures. It doesn't go right back to, it starts straight away with digraphs in. And again, a few more there. And that would be the end of your section 1. That would be your 20 words for that. Section 2 can add in a lot more of the other GPC. So again, that document there shows you what is available in section 2 and which GPCs they can use in the phonics screening check. Only 12 of these are chapter 4B graphemes. So most of the ones that are 4B graphemes are long vowel sounds, like where the letter A represents an A instead of an A. Also, you've got the OU, that's quite a common one. There's all the different pronunciations for the OU. That one comes up quite a lot in the phonics screening check, so it's always worth bearing in mind. The phonetic structure can get a little bit more complex. I mean, sometimes it is still just consonant vowel, but you've got longer vowel digraphs or trigraphs in there, and you start to get your split digraphs into these as well. Towards the end of the check, the phonetic structure gets even longer, and at the very end of the check, they will be doing 2-syllable words. There'll be 1 5-letter, 1 6-letter, 1 7-letter, and 1 8-letter 2-syllable words at the end. If you want to look more into the structure and really figure out which these words are, you can go on that document that I said about earlier, and it explains exactly what representations they can use for it. So here you can see that we've got that consonant vowel structure for that first word, but it is using the more complex vowel digraphs that are normally taught in 4A or 4B if you're in Phonics Shed. You've also got a split digraph quite early on in this second section and another one at the bottom of the page here. Moving on here, you've got a lot more of the consonant blends coming in and still split digraphs with this one at the bottom. And then we're back to real words. So this section actually has more real words in it. The first section had more pseudo words in it. And on this final page is where you've got that 5-letter, 2-syllable word, the 6-letter, 2-syllable word, 7-letter, and the 8-letter, 2-syllable word. Now, there are some things that aren't in the phonics screening check. Like in Phonics Check, we teach what we call the additional doubles. So that's things like DD, PP, TT. They won't be in the phonics screening check. The trigraph URE will not be in the phonics screening check. It has so many different pronunciations and a lot of regional variability with that one, which is why I think they have avoided it. EAR isn't in there either. The OE, a grapheme. EW if it's representing the OO sound. EY, ARE, or when it's representing the like in word. EY representing the A isn't there either, or O representing oo. Your A variations aren't in there, and your Y variations also aren't in there. And the final one is the Z phoneme. Altogether, it's not used in the phonics screening check. However, we do still need to consider those because they are still part of our curriculum. Just because they're not covered in the check, it doesn't mean that they aren't expected to be taught. Other things we also need to consider are high frequency words, Appendix 1 and Appendix 2 of the national curriculum, and other reading skills such as comprehension or writing skills like transcription and composition. All of these things are nothing to do with the phonics screening check. Okay, let's look at some things to actually help your children prepare for it. So you can use lots of online games. Phonics Shed has lots of online games available, and we've got the new phoneme recordings, which should really help with that clarity there. So you can use those to help the children prepare. Reading as much as possible, so reading as many books as possible. You've got all your Phonics Shed decodable books available as physical books, but you've also got ebooks as well. And you can just read anything. It doesn't have to necessarily be phonics books all the time. If you come across books like this, where children can read quite a lot of the words in it, but need help with some of it, they might need adults to support with the words that they haven't got the GPCs for yet. One way to increase the amount of exposure children are getting to phonics is to use different provision in your classrooms. So we have included with all the lesson plans lots of continuous or enhanced provision suggestions which help bring your phonics into other areas as well, and there's additional suggestions at the bottom of each lesson plan. This means you've got extra activities that you can maybe use as homework or additional things at the end of the day or in the afternoon to try and increase the amount of time children are working on phonics. We have got the Phonics Screening Check simulator available. So if you launch our assessment tool, up here you can see when I select Screening Check Simulator, there's no other settings to do. You just press Next, choose the child that you're doing it with, and then you get an online demonstration simulator that is very similar to the actual check itself. It takes into account all of those structures that we were talking about earlier, and it shows all of the pseudo words with a little alien picture, so the children still know that they are pseudo words. You can mark the children's responses to that, and you can print out a report at the end for each child. And we also have planning available. So if you use Phonics Shed and you download your medium-term plan, you'll see in the summer one, there's a chunk of chapter 2 to 4B consolidation and intervention to try and help with preparing for that phonics screening check, and also a week before the phonics screening check preparing for those. So if you go into Phonics Shed, Scheme, and then chapter 4B, At the bottom there, after you've taught 4B, you'll see Chapter 2 to 4B consolidation. You can read the guidance about it, and then you can download the 4 weeks of planning. I know there's only 3 weeks listed there. That's because there's 2 weeks on the 4B bit there. So that's why it will all be in there. That is actually being refreshed this year, so you'll get extra new planning. So if you go there and download it now, you'll have the planning that's there. But come May half term, there will be fresh planning available for that as well. And the final thing I want to talk about today is common problems that seem to come up in the phonics screening check. So one is missing split digraphs. It is a large concern. So a lot of that planning I've just talked about focuses on the split digraphs and being able to identify them in pseudo words and in real words, or where they're not actually split digraphs. So you might have to do lots of activities in there that are sorting whether it is or isn't a split digraph, and reading lots of words with ones that have split digraphs in and ones that look like they might have a split digraph but aren't actually. Switching letters can also be a really common thing. So you get children that see a nonsense word, a pseudo word like strom, and they say something like storm because they've just switched those letters in their head to make it into a real word. So again, doing lots of sorting with those sorts of things can help the children identify whether it's got those in or not. And also using your sound buttons on these sorts of things can really help. Focusing on easily confused graphemes is really helpful. So I had a lot of children that used to really struggle with the ch, sh, with the H in all of them. They got them muddled up. Or you get children that mix things like AY and OY, or B and D even. So make sure you know your children's strengths and weaknesses, and if they do have a particular struggle, it could be really impactful if they're in a lot of the words in the screening check. For example, if you've got children that do struggle with B and D, normally there is enough words in the check that have that B or the D in, so it actually does have a significant impact on their score. Forgetting to blend is one of the biggest things that I think happens, and it's really frustrating because we cannot prompt the children when they're in the check to blend all the sounds together. So make sure in the run up to this check you are getting the children to say the sounds in the words, say all the phonemes, but blend them together without you having to prompt all the time. So you might have to do a lot of training and preparation for that, but just make sure that you're not always the one that's prompting them to do it. And starting to use longer words and still reminding them to blend can really help with that too. Making the pseudo words real doesn't just happen with switching letters. It happens just with anything that look like it might be near enough a real word. So make sure you do a little bit of practice with the pseudo words. Talk often with the children about what this little alien or monster character means. It means that it is not a real word. We're not looking to make it into a real word. It's not meant to have meaning. And if it is having meaning to you, then maybe check it again and make sure we've read it correctly. And the final thing is independence. Make sure everything that you're doing in class is leading towards them being able to read independently and do it in the check independently with that blending process. Or if you are wanting them to use sound buttons, you need them to be at a point where they just pick a pencil up and put sound buttons on when they think they need it, not at the prompt of a teacher. Okay, I'm nearly there. Is there any questions that have come up, Amanda, at all?
No.
No. Okay. If you've got any questions, feel free to start typing them in the chat box now. I just want to let you know about next week. We've got that phonics screening check for parents. So it tells them all what the phonics screening check is, so they've got a bit more information and a couple of tips of how to help at home. Make sure you're following us on our social media so you can see lots of things on Facebook. In the run up to the Phonics Screening Check, we will probably put lots of tips and tricks out there, so you might want to have a look at that. And you can always watch our past webinars back on YouTube. You can also email us support@edshed.com if you need any help with anything. And we do also deliver CPD in spelling and in phonics. So you can find all of that on the training page on our website, which is just a couple along from where you find the webinars tab on our website too. Okay, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon.